football season. We take forever to get here, to get to the beginning of it. Then in a blink of an eye, it's gone. And it feels like earlier, maybe this year, even than in years past, the coaching carousel was doing its thing. It got started early with Southern Cal, and then LSU followed suit, and then just name after name after name. What do you make of some of these jobs that are open right now? And I know it's a pretty open-ended question. I guess I'd start you off with this. I have made the argument for a couple of years now that it has become more difficult than ever to hire away a sitting, successful Power 5 head coach. It's just hard to go hire a new coach and get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the SEC West, I think, is an exception because right now in the West, you've got 3 second-year coaches who have all made their ADs look pretty smart. 2 of them there, in Mississippi for you guys, and then obviously what Sam Pittman has done at Arkansas. But that to me is kind of the exception. I don't know. I kind of think that some of these programs have unrealistic expectations, and they get pressured into making a move by their fan bases and by the threat of ticket sales lagging behind, and their programs. I think in some cases, they've got illogical and unrealistic expectations for what they can realistically accomplish. I mean, as of now, there's only 4 teams getting into the playoff every year. It seems like that's the barometer for a lot of programs, though. It seems like for 40 or 50 programs out there, that's the barometer of success. And I hate to break it to you, but making a coaching change isn't necessarily going to bump you up into the elite of the sport. But it seems to reason that a lot of these programs think that it will. So, yes, it's moving at a rapid pace, and woke up this morning to the news of Virginia Tech. And you can certainly make the case that it was time for them to move on from Justin Fuente. But how certain are we that the Hokies are going to go out there and land that guy who's going to get them back to the Frank Beamer glory days? That it's a risky proposition, there's no doubt.
We won't make it all the way through the list. Michael Borky and I were doing this before the break, though. I was throwing him at a job, and I was saying, or throwing a job at him and said, okay, you're the athletics director, and you're competing in a vacuum. You can go get your guy. Who is that guy? So who is that guy if you are Scott Woodward at LSU?
Given his history, I mean, it kind of seems like Jimbo might have been that guy. If I'm Scott Woodward right now, though, I'd be looking at James Franklin. I mean, it kind of seems like Franklin could be ready to move on. It's not as though things have gone south necessarily at Penn State. It's just they haven't really been able to achieve that breakthrough. And they were ranked in the top 10 earlier this season. He's got a great recruiting class lined up. A lot of those guys are expected to sign here in a few weeks during the early signing period. So maybe that kind of keeps him there. But at the same time, you're talking about a coach who might be looking for that place where he could finally break through and win a national title. And I think Franklin's track record, his success in the SEC previously at Vanderbilt, I would say A-minus level work that he's done at Penn State positioned him, in my mind, to be somebody who could take that LSU job and come in and immediately recruit a top 5 class year in and year out. And we know he can coach on the field. Just look at what he did at Vanderbilt. So, I mean, that would be top of my list if I was Scott Woodward. I'd be looking up there to James Franklin and seeing if he was interested in making his return to the SEC.
What would you do at Southern Cal?
I get Luke Fickell again being the number one choice there because of the relationship between the AD who hired him at Cincinnati, who's now there at USC. So that makes a lot of sense. However, I'd have my doubts over whether or not Luke Fickell wants to uproot his family. He's an Ohio guy through and through, has spent almost his entire life in that state. He's got a ton of kids. They're family-oriented. Cincinnati's about to move to the Big 12 and should do pretty well in that league. I could see him, kind of being one of those rare exceptions who doesn't necessarily jump at a job just because of its prestige or the money he can make. Again, Franklin would be, I think, a pretty good choice out there, too. I'm not James Franklin's agent. I don't work for him. But I could see him fitting well at either of those jobs. After that, I don't really know who it would take to work at USC. Maybe Dave Aranda, though, because he's done a fantastic job at Baylor. And he, I think, would instill some of that toughness that's been missing at USC. I mean, if you read the reports about Clay Helton's firing, it was pretty clear that they were lacking fundamentally a toughness at the line of scrimmage and in the trenches. I think David Aranda would fix that problem. So I don't know if he's your top choice, but if Fickell says no, like for the reasons I just outlined, David Aranda would be a pretty good choice out there, I think.
Dave Aranda seems like a level-headed guy, too. Like, he's not mercurial. He just he knows who he is, and he goes about it, and he's, like, he just seems to get it. I would imagine that Baylor does everything they can to make it difficult for him to leave. But isn't that the case with all of these places? I mean, Lane Kiffin's name's popped up, at least at the beginning of this tilt-a-whirl, And maybe he goes. Maybe there's an opportunity at LSU or somewhere else, and he makes a move. But there's a very finite number of places that you can go where you're going to be in a better situation financially. Maybe you go for another reason, but I mean, even at a place like Ole Miss, if they've got to pay $6.5 or $7 or $8 million to hang on to a guy like Lane Kiffin, they're going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kind of think that coaches should appreciate being in a situation like what Lane Kiffin is in right now at Ole Miss, a place where you're not necessarily going to feel the heat if you don't win 10 games. Like, of course, there is an expectation that you'll cycle up every few years at Ole Miss and have a really good season and compete for the SEC West. That's kind of what he's doing this year. But if, heaven forbid, Lane Kiffin were to only win 8 games next year, it's not like they're going to be looking to run him out of town. And I would think from a quality of life and just a general stability standpoint, that would be something that a coach should value. But the other side of that is that being fired from an elite job is so financially lucrative that I think in the way some people think, it almost mitigates the risk of going to a place where you might get run out for failing to reach expectations, because you're going to be, set for life. And that's absurd to think about, but it's true. I mean, being fired from an elite Power 5 job is like winning the lottery. So in many ways, getting hired there is like winning the lottery, because it really doesn't matter what you do, so long as you don't get fired with cause. Then you're going to be set for life. And I guess that's that I can see where that would be hard to turn down.
Not a bad way to look at it, actually. We're going to pay you somewhere between $5 and $7 million a year for at least the next 3 years, and if you're terrible, then we're going to pay you $12 million to go away.
Exactly.
That's actually not a bad career path. Let's switch gears away from hiring and firing coaches just for a second. It doesn't happen this week. Ole Miss has got Vanderbilt this week. Mississippi State's got Tennessee State. But we are 9 days away from the Egg Bowl on Thanksgiving night, and it's such a fascinating matchup when you look at these two teams. When you look at Mississippi State, period, they've got the bad loss to Memphis back in the beginning of the year, and they've got, frankly, a bad loss to LSU. But they've also got some really, really impressive wins, and they're playing their best so far this year. And then an Ole Miss team that's sitting here at 8 and probably going to be at 9 going into the ballgame. Stakes really, really high in Starkville in 9 days.
Yeah, the only really embarrassing or lopsided defeat that Mississippi State has suffered was against Alabama. And I mean, I guess you could say the same for Ole Miss too. I mean, Mississippi State really got run off the field by Alabama, but they've been really good, the last month. Mike Leach has the air raid working. I mean, it's gone a little quicker than I thought it would. Of course, the opener under him last year with KJ Costello having that huge game against LSU, you were like, oh my gosh. It's here. It's arrived. The renaissance is upon us in the SEC. We might have jumped the gun a little bit on that because of their struggles later on last season, but now they have figured it out. Will Rogers is a really good player, and their other losses aside from that Alabama loss have all been really close games. I mean, you mentioned that Memphis game. That was a fluky loss with that weird call on the punt return. Then you got the they lost by 3 points against Arkansas. I've been right there against everyone they played against Alabama. I think it'll be a fantastic Egg Bowl. It should be really fun. It's the perfect Egg Bowl because that game is going to be, what they are playing for. There's not going to be, in all likelihood, a division title implication to it. It's not like one team is going to be needing that win to get to bowl eligibility. Maybe there's a New Year's Day bowl bid at stake for Ole Miss, but at the end of the day, they're playing for the egg. So I think it'll be a really fun meeting between two offenses that, I mean, honestly, are among the best in the country right now.
Yeah, and it feels like a year where it's going to be about football and not about anything else on the field and sideshow stuff. It's going to just be about football on that night. David, always appreciate your time. Good visiting with you this afternoon.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks.
David Cobb, college football writer at CBSSports.com. Follow him on Twitter at David W. Cobb.